now, you're about to experience our Sunday showcase. It's one last opportunity to hear some of our tellers from the 50th National Storytelling Festival. Please sit back, maybe grab a beverage, and enjoy this hour along with me.
Actually, a lot of people ask about this guitar, so let me just tell you about it to start off. This is a Wayne Henderson guitar. And if you don't know who Wayne is a guitar builder from over in Rugby, Virginia. There's about 6 people who live in Rugby. They take turns being the preacher and town drunk. That's how. And Wayne got famous because he built a guitar for Eric Clapton, actually 2 guitars. There was this guy who was a huge Eric Clapton fan and had just received one of Wayne Henderson's guitars. Now, you have to wait on the waiting list for 12 years to get one of these guitars. And he got backstage passes to see Eric Clapton, and he took the guitar. And Eric Clapton played the guitar, fell in love with it, and offered the man $100,000 on the spot for the guitar. And Eric Clapton loved that guitar so much that he ordered 2 more. And Wayne put him on the waiting list with everybody else. Well, after he had waited about 10 years for his guitar, Wayne called up Eric's people and said, "These guitars are ready." And they said, "Oh, we'll send a representative there to pick those up." And Wayne said, "Oh, no, you won't. He'll come here and get them, or else he won't get them." And they said, "We can't have Eric Clapton come there. Why, what would we do in the way of security?" And Wayne said, "Well, it ain't like he's Earl Scruggs." I'd like to just play you a couple of songs. I want to start off with a song that I wrote, actually, about the Vanderbilt family. Now, how many of you have been to Asheville? Oh, everybody. Well, if you haven't been, you've got to come to Asheville. Some of the best food and music and pottery and painting. It's just a playground for food lovers and art lovers and beer lovers. Of course, you've got to go see the Biltmore House when you come there. Now, Asheville has been through phases. It wasn't always the chic town like it is now. In fact, in the 70s and 80s, it was kind of going through a rebuilding period, and my buddy David Holt told me that the first sushi restaurant that came to Asheville, they served hush puppies with the sushi. That's true. But if you go to Asheville, you must visit the Biltmore House, built by George Vanderbilt. And I read this book called Fortune's Children, and I took away from the book how unhappy these people were. They had everything money could buy. They would spend $40,000 on flower arrangements for one party. And this is in the late 1800s. Can you imagine? And I think the reason they were so unhappy was because they were expected to marry within their social class rather than to marry for love. And I thought, it's great to live in a time where we don't have to worry about that. You can just love someone for exactly who they are. They don't have to be a millionaire. They don't have to play guitar. They don't have to be famous. You just love them for exactly who they are. They might burp at the dinner table. They might snore in their sleep. But through all of that, you just love them for exactly who they are. And that's the reason I wrote this song called "I Love You for Who You Are." First time that we chanced to meet, you smiled and my heart skipped a beat. That summer night in our hometown, the crickets were singing, the moon shone down on a world that had been unkind. Stole your heart and your peace of mind. Dreams and wishes come and go, but there's one thing you should know. Well, I love you for who you are. You don't have to be a movie star. You don't have to drive a fancy car, make $1 million or play the guitar. 'Cause I love you for who you are, by my side or in lands afar, right on the mark or below the bar. I love you for who you are. Vanderbilt had a big fine home. Kubla Khan built a pleasure dome. Einstein found relativity, but I found you and you found me, and we don't need a mansion grand on a 100-acre piece of Xanadu land. I'll love you till the end of time, whether you're rich or don't have a dime. Now I can guarantee you one thing. I'm probably the only person from Madison County to include the word Xanadu in a song they wrote. I love you for who you are. You don't have to be a movie star. You don't have to drive a fancy car, make $1 million or play the guitar. 'Cause I love you for who you are, by my side or in lands afar, right on the mark, below the bar. I love you for who you are. Oh, not quite on track or right on par. I love you for who you are. I've got about 2 minutes left, and I'm just going to close out with a good rousing fiddle tune. Is that all right with y'all? It has been an absolute honor and a pleasure to be a part, and I'll always remember being a part of the 50th Annual National Storytelling Festival. And in the words of my granddad, the last words he said before he died, I love you all. Here's Sally Gooden. Bake a little pie, bake a little pudding, give it all the way for the love of Sally Gooden. Thank you all so much.
Hello, everyone. It has been a delight and an honor to be with you here at the 50th National Storytelling Festival. None of us get here by ourselves. And so I want to tell you just real quick that in 2014, the first weekend-long storytelling retreat I went on to learn from a master storyteller was one with Sid Lieberman. And he told his story, Abraham and Isaac sacrifice at Gettysburg, and as a brand new baby storyteller, I felt like there might be a place in this world for the stories that I needed to tell. That weekend, I worked on a story with him, and then a few months later, he passed away. And I promised myself then that if I ever had the opportunity and the privilege of standing on this stage, I would tell that story in honor of Sid Lieberman. And so I bring this story to you now. It was a hot and humid day, a day that might have been called sultry, had the heat not crossed the line to oppressive, and had not the circumstances been so dire. The sun beat down upon row upon row upon row of men, dressed in varying shades of blue, gray, and butternut. Many of these men were battle-weary, wary of the fighting to come. They'd fought the day before, fought for the good ground, for the high ground, for the ground that could easily be defended, the ground that would make it more likely that the people on their side would live. The Confederates had pushed the Union Army out of the little town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, but the Union held on to heights around the town. Yet there were still pieces of good ground that had not seen battle, and it was there that much of the fighting would take place on this day. It was into this situation that the 20th Maine Volunteer Infantry Regiment marched. They were a young regiment, having been formed less than a year before, and they'd seen comparatively little battle. They were present at Antietam, but had been held in reserve, and were so anxious to be part of this fight that though they had marched more than 20 miles on this day, they were ready. They were led by a tall, blonde man with a handlebar mustache. He had a scholarly air about him, and if you would have guessed that he would have been more comfortable in front of a classroom than on a battlefield, you would have nearly been right. Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain hadn't attended West Point like so many of his fellow officers on both the Union and Confederate sides. Instead, he'd attended Bowdoin College, receiving 2 degrees before becoming a professor of languages and rhetoric. When the Civil War broke out, he requested a leave of absence to go and join the Union Army, and his administration said, "No, we're not giving you a leave of absence to go and join the Union Army, but you can go and travel in Europe for 2 years with your family and study." He accepted their offer and went and joined the Union Army anyway. He was made the lieutenant colonel of the newly formed 20th Maine and immediately began studying all the things about the military he didn't know. His commanding officers noticed his dedication, as did the men under his command. But this dedication and determination wasn't new when he joined the Army. You see, Chamberlain had grown up on a farm in Maine, but wanted to go to Bowdoin. And so he'd rise early in the morning and study by candlelight, then go do the work on the farm, then go out and come back in and study again till late at night. And he passed his test. But his difficulties weren't over. You see, Chamberlain had what during his lifetime was known as a stammer. It would later be called a stutter, and today we would call it a disfluency. He didn't have the benefit of a local speech language pathologist, but he was determined that this difficulty would not define him. So he devised a way of almost singing out his words on a continuous outpouring of breath and became known as an excellent public speaker. It was this determination he brought with him to the Union Army and to the field of battle that day at Gettysburg. On the second day of Gettysburg, the Union Army was drawn like a fishhook, with the top part between 2 hills that today we call Big Round Top and Little Round Top. Little Round Top was the most important from a military perspective, and that's where Chamberlain and his 20th Maine were sent. When he reached the top of the hill, his commanding officer said, "I want you to look to the right, to the left." Got those confused for a second. To the left. And he said, and looked, and he saw nothing but trees and underbrush and a steep hill. And his officer said, "You, sir, the extreme left of the Union Army, you must hold that ground at all hazards." And with that, he was gone, leaving Chamberlain to prepare his men. Chamberlain, mulling over those words in his head, hold that ground at all hazards. What did it mean? Hold it to the last man standing, to the last bullet, to the last rock that could be thrown? But he didn't have much time to think, because the Confederates began surging up that hill, and the men of the 20th Maine pushed them back. For the next nearly 2 hours, that's the way it went. The men surging up the hill, the other men pushing them back. At one point, Chamberlain saw that the Confederates were about to come around his line, and he thinned out his already thinning line and made a right angle and refused the line at that point. But then he saw that his men were almost out of ammunition. He sent one man up the hill to men from Pennsylvania and Michigan and New York. And then again, while that man was gone, again the Confederates came up the hill, and again the men from Maine pushed them back. And then the man came back. He said there was no more ammunition. The fighting was too hot. And it was then that the mettle of this man from Maine was tested. He called his officers around him, told them to fix bayonets, and said that when he gave the order, the men on the left should come parallel, and then all should swing down the hill like a door on its hinges. And maybe, just maybe, the ground they held would be kept. He heard the men move up and down the line, the click of metal. He felt the sweat roll down his neck, smelled the scent of wet wool uniforms. And again, he heard the sound of people coming up the hill, and he waited a moment longer before he gave the command, "Bayonet! Forward!" And the men ran down the hill. In the next few minutes, fewer than 200 men from Maine captured, not killed, nearly 400 men of the Confederacy, using only their bayonets, courage, and a fierce determination that the ground they defended must be held. Many people will tell you that the turning point of the Battle of Gettysburg came on the third day, July 3rd, 1863, when over 10,000 of Lee's men marched across nearly a mile of wide open field toward the center of the Union line and had their numbers more than decimated in what would come to be known as Pickett's Charge. But others will tell you that the true turning point of that battle came a day earlier on July 2nd at a place we call Little Round Top, when Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain and his brave men from Maine determined that they would indeed hold that ground at all hazards, and in so doing, help to change their future and all of our pasts. Thank you.
Goeienaand, vader. Juanijatan kalamchacht katakaluchi taima Juankuta nakmin yupigni kalamchimtnik chautimtnik makutwani Juankuta chautput knikngamtki kanrut klaraput. Anyone care to translate? I talk in our language because I want you to hear our language actually being spoken. It's a living language at home. I said I'm happy to give you a very small glimpse of Central Yupik, of how we have lived and the pride that we have in maintaining and continuing our life. I stand on the shoulders of the many storytellers from ancient times. It is estimated where I live, where we all live on the Bering Coast, where I have lived all my childhood. We've been there a good 30 centuries or more. That's quite a long time to be in one area. Now, the Arctic, Bering Coast can be rather difficult and hard. Many times your first mistake could be your last. So it's very important, all the survival skills that we've had to learn over the centuries, and all the animals that we have employed in terms of using their furs and their skins and the meat for survival. Therefore, we have asked them over time and time again, please be plentiful for us. We implore you. We need you for our survival. That's why we have many ceremonies devoted to the supplication of the universe and asking the universe for our very survival. Now, there's one song one of the elder women taught to me. She said, you need to learn this song, she said. It is called, If you do not sing and dance, you will become moldy. It's a very important song to know, because if you don't sing and dance, you are liable to get moldy. So, we approach life also with joy and fun and excitement. And this song is part of that survival can also be joy. Makunig maani ipimail ra anak aya hanga chumil ngunay kachukhinari aya hanga chumil ngunay. Yuraksa ilami, here comes the mold. Ukuktushini, eya, ahanga, chumil munai. Kachukhinari, eya, ahanga, chumil munai. Makunig maani ipimail ra anak aya ahanga chumil ngunay. Yurak sa alami, here comes more mold. Ukuktu siini aya ahanga chumil ngunay. So the secret in life is to keep on dancing and singing no matter what. All right. One of my mother's great aunts, relatives, taught me this other song. It's a pre-contact song, a song which was created before the new people arrive to our shores. Anga, yeah, aria, yeah, gauna tu siu. Would someone please, says the composition, sing to me. It is a soldier's lament, because war is madness. Anga, yeah, agia, yeah, gauna tu siu. Will someone please sing to me? Tears are about to come out. Someone, please sing to me. Anga, yeah, aria, yeah, gauna atu siu. Thank you. I'm dancing for you, I am moving for you. I am dancing for you, I am moving for you. And if you don't find to be quite enough, I'm going to mix a big bowl of Eskimo ice cream and serve you. How's that? That's just the way it is, says the song. And we have lots of flavors like fish liver ice cream. It's a very much of an acquired taste. Agula we come and naya we come can. Agula we come and naya we come can. Ya hey ya yang ya. Ya kidaksale agula we come and naya we come can. Agula we come and naya we come can. Ya hey ya yang ya. You know this song goes for about an hour. Agula we come and naya we come can. Agula we come and naya we come can. Ya hey ya yang ya. I was given only 10 minutes. Thank you.
Let me tell you a little story about something that happened to me. When I was 18 and I had to register for the draft, I had what Quakers would call a stop in their mind about what I should do. And it's when I started to go to Quaker meeting. And I eventually registered to be a CO, a conscientious objector, but I didn't have to deal with that because my draft number was high. And when I did that, my parents weren't quite sure what to do. And my grandmother, my dad's mom, said, well, you know, I think there might have been some Quakers in our background. I think my family's from Western Ohio, Eastern Indiana. She said, I think they might have come up from North Carolina in the 1820s. Well, I didn't think much about that. My dad said, no, that wasn't true. So I went on, and when I was 19, I worked in a project investigating racial discrimination in federal housing projects in Belgrade, Florida. I spent a couple weeks at the King Center in Atlanta and met Martin Luther King's father, Daddy King, and I sang with Coretta Scott King. and met those people. And then I got a job with American Friends Service Committee and worked on discrimination. And in 1990, I recorded a song, produced a song of songs from the Civil Rights Movement. So 4 or 5 years ago, I drove across the country. I was doing work on a book, Now You Say Yes. And I stopped in Fountain City, Indiana, where my dad grew up. I grew up on the other side of the state line in Greenville. Fountain City is like the Holy Roman Empire. It didn't have a fountain, and it wasn't a city. And I knew the little house. My dad, his father had died when my dad was quite young, and they'd moved out off the farm into town. They lived in this, he called it a workman's cottage. And my dad grew up rough. And I knew where the cottage was in town. He told me where it was, and I got it there. Right next to it was the Levi Coffin House. And I'd heard of Levi Coffin, but I didn't know much about him. And I went in there, and there were two people very eager to give me a tour of the Levi Coffin House. Levi Coffin was known as the Grand Station Master of the Underground Railroad. And he moved up from the South, and he got a house there. And they say that over 3,000 escapees from slavery came through his house, and none of them were ever caught on the Underground Railroad. And eventually he moved to Cincinnati, and he was a model for some of those heroes of the white folks in Uncle Tom's Cabin. So I was interested in going on this tour. And I was the only one there, so I got a very detailed tour. And in the kind of sub-basement where the kitchen was, they stand there and they talked about how Harriet Tubman had passed through that house, and William Lloyd Garrison had passed through that house, and Frederick Douglass had stood there, and he talked about people. There was a knock on the door one night, and they went to answer it, and they said, we've got some cargo for you, and they opened up the false bottom, and 15 people came in, and they hid them in the closets until they could get them out. So we were talking about this, and I said, my dad grew up next door. And they said, what was his name? And I said, his name was Harley. And they said, no, we don't know of any Harleys. I said, but my grandmother said that maybe her family had come up from here. And they said, what was her name? And I said, well, her name was Moat. And they said, look at this picture on the wall. This picture, Levi Coffin, this picture was drawn by Carl Moat. And then we talked, and I said, well, she said they came up in the 1820s. And she said, yes, they did. They came from the Guilford area in North Carolina. That's when Levi Coffin came up. So your family was part of this. And as soon as he said that, I had this incredible shaking in my very being, that somehow I had been part of this. And I began to think about this whole notion of epigenesis, which is now we have this great concern that stress, that trauma is passed on genetically from person to person through the generations. And when someone something like that is visited upon people, it takes generations and generations for that to heal. And standing there, I thought of all the things that I'd been led to do in my life, and I wonder if epigenesis might have to do with something else. So finally I had a story to tell of my people who had done something that somehow fit in with what I wanted to do and how I wanted to be. And I might add that story is part of what I feel that I can do here. And it just welled up from deep within me. Now here's the trick. 50 years later, the Moat family played a part in the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan in Indiana. In the 1920s, over half of the legislature in Indiana were members of the Ku Klux Klan. So that is part of my heritage too. We use the word heritage as if it's something that we should always treasure. But here is the thing. We choose what story we want to tell about ourselves. And we get to look back on what has been brought to us, because the truth is, in every story, in every family, there is greed and there is hate and there is hurt and there is alcoholism and all those things. Every one of us has one of those in us. But also, we have stories of kindness and resilience and perseverance and tolerance. We use the word heritage in this very loose way. We have to honor our heritage, and we use it to defend things sometimes that we don't have to defend. Someone said, if your right eye offends thee, pluck it out. So today, as we go home, I want to remind you that we get to choose the stories we tell about where we came from and who we are. And it's in that story that we begin to imagine who we can become. I want to thank all of you for listening so well, and I want to thank my tribe. My tribe is far-flung and scattered, and I haven't been able to see them for years. And if you're not with your tribe, you're not sure who you are. But this weekend, with my friends, I've been reminded of that. Thank you all very much.
Gloria looked at herself in the mirror as she brushed her teeth and thought about the day ahead. An ordinary day, she said. I wish I was the kind of person who did something that made an impact on other people's lives. She'd often dreamed about being a scientist who could help cure cancer, or maybe someone who did good works like Mother Teresa. No, she said, really nothing I do ever makes a difference. She threw some kibble into the bowl for her dog Mac, promised him a longer walk when she got home from work, and headed for the bus stop. When she neared it, on the ground, she saw an envelope. She bent over and picked it up. It was addressed and stamped. She thought to herself, this is headed for a utility company. I bet the person doesn't even know they dropped it. And so she slid it into the mailbox. She got on the bus. She started talking to the lady on the seat beside her. She was talking about taking her grandfather to his doctor's appointment. The lady was only half awake, and she fervently wished that Gloria would shut up. But Gloria kept on talking. She said, we were really getting worried about my grandfather. It seemed his mind was really slipping. We were concerned, and when we took him to the doctor said that a shortage of vitamin D in elderly people often mimics the beginning of depression and dementia. Old people don't always get enough time out in the sun, and if they don't get enough vitamin D in their diet, that kind of dementia, that kind of fake dementia can begin. And the lady in the seat behind Gloria perked up her ears at the sound of the word dementia. And she listened carefully to everything that Gloria had to say, while the lady beside Gloria thought, oh God, make her stop talking. Oh God, let her stop talking. Said, you know, one of the problems is that vitamin D's not shortages, deficiencies, not really one of the things they test for in the regular panels when they test old people. Don't you think that's weird? And the lady behind her got off the bus, prepared to go and call her mother's doctor immediately. And Gloria went on to work. She was really good at helping people identify the problem they were trying to solve, no matter how angry they were. One after another, she listened to those angry people call and tried to help them. It was one of her great strengths to be able to identify exactly what they needed. In the next cubicle, the new hire said, how can you stand to talk to all these angry people every day? And Gloria said, they're not angry with me. They don't even know me. They're just angry at the situation they're in. Please don't take their anger personally. That would be exhausting. And the new girl hired thought to herself, I really need this job. So maybe I'll stick it out one more day and see if I can learn to stand it. Gloria went through 7 or 8 more irate phone calls, and then it was time to break for lunch. When she and the new hire got on the elevator to go down, Gloria said to the new girl, I talked to 7 angry people and one that was just bewildered. And they laughed together because the new girl began to realize there was a difference between the ones that were angry and the ones that were bewildered. And that made her feel better. And when they sat down at the lunch table, Gloria was talking away about her friend who had a brand new baby and how cute the baby was. She could just eat her up. But how the baby's mother wasn't doing so well. She said, I was going to buy something for the baby off the registry that her mother put together, but I decided not to because her mother's exhausted all the time. Really, really dragging. And so I decided that instead of buying anything off the registry, I would buy a housekeeping service for her, maid service. I could only afford once a week for 2 weeks, but I thought maybe at least 2 weeks would give her time to rest a little bit and get back up on her feet. She doesn't have any of her family nearby where they could help out. And as the waitress came to put their food on the table, she heard that part of Gloria's conversation, and she thought about her niece who had a baby that was only a few weeks old. And she thought to herself, the chaos that's in my niece's apartment is a part of the problem with the depression she's having. I think I'm going to tell her that as a gift, I'm going to give her cleaning her apartment. I can't afford to hire anybody. But if I tell her it's a gift, that she might accept it from me because she really needs the help. When they finished lunch and headed back upstairs, as they got on the elevator, Gloria was talking about the little kid that she tutored on Saturdays. She said, English isn't his first language at home, so he's having trouble with his reading. We have the best time together. I'm really having fun helping that kid learn to be a better reader. And an older woman standing by the elevator buttons heard what Gloria had said and thought to herself, well, with my heart condition, I can't do much that's strenuous, but I could help a little kid learn to read. I think I'll call and ask about that. Gloria was back to work in her cubicle, answering those angry telephone calls. A message came across her computer that there was going to be a blood drive that was going to happen the next day. And the new hire said to her, are you going to be donating blood? And Gloria said, oh, Lord, no, not me. I'm a coward. I know it's important, and I'm glad that other people do it, but the whole idea makes me sick at my stomach. The man who was repairing the copy machine heard what Gloria said, and he said to himself, well, the nerve of that woman being so chicken about something that's so important. And as he was putting his tools back in his toolbox, he thought to himself, I'm going to make sure that I donate blood more regularly from now on. One after another, Gloria answered all those angry phone calls, doing everything she could to pinpoint exactly the kind of help the person on the other end of the line needed. And she got back on the bus, riding home. She pulled a book out of her purse. She rarely went anywhere without one. She knew that the right book at the right time could change a person's life. The one she was reading was really important to her. So she thought that even if she only had time to read 3 or 4 pages, it would be worthwhile. But just before it was time for Gloria to get off the bus, a lady was getting off with a toddler and a bunch of packages. And to make sure the lady didn't fall, Gloria got up out of her seat and went to help her down the stairs. She got down onto the ground. She looked back up at Gloria and smiled a really beautiful smile and said, "Thank you." And when Gloria realized her stop was just the next one, instead of going back to her seat, she decided to stand and let somebody else sit down where she'd been. She was already off the bus and walking down the block when the man who sat down in her seat picked up the book that she'd left behind. And he looked at it more out of boredom than interest, really. But after he'd read a little piece of the book jacket, he opened the book and he began to read hungrily. And the appointment card from Gloria's OBGYN appointment that she was using as a bookmark fluttered out of the book and landed on the floor of the bus, where it would be found later that night by the woman who cleaned the buses and who looked at that card and took it as an omen and called to make a long overdue appointment. Gloria walked home, opened the door. Mac was so glad to see her. He was jumping up and down and going round in circles, but she said, "You have to wait just a little bit. Let me put dinner in the oven." She got everything she needed together and slid it in the oven and said to herself, "That's going to take a little time, about an hour. Maybe I should take Mac to the dog park while it's in the oven cooking." Just as she started out the door, an oldies station that she liked to listen to caught her attention. Mostly, she kept the radio on to keep Mac company while she was at work every day. But a few days before, on a lark, she had called in a request for Unchained Melody by the Righteous Brothers. They hadn't played it, but there it was now on the radio. And so Gloria stopped for a moment and listened to that music for a little while. And she thought about a dance she had attended when she was a younger woman. A dance with a boy who had dark hair and strong arms. And all the way across town, another woman heard that same melody and remembered when she used to dance to that tune with the man who was now her husband. And as she swayed back and forth listening to the music, for a few minutes, she forgot to be angry with him. Gloria told Mac that he'd been really patient, and because he had been, they'd get to stay longer at the dog park, and she snapped the leash on his collar. When they got to the dog park, she unleashed him and let him run with the other dogs, and she was laughing at his antics as he did so. She sat on a bench, prepared to watch the dogs and think for a few minutes. But a woman she had never seen before came in with a miniature schnauzer and unleashed her dog and sat down beside Gloria. She turned to Gloria and said, "Which one's yours?" And Gloria pointed out, "Mac, he's a Scottish Terrier." And the lady next to her said, "Max is a great name for a dog." "No," said Gloria, "not Max. Mac, it's short for McTavish. And that's short for a much longer name. I'd be embarrassed to stand in the public place and call out Mac's full name. It would be embarrassing. Kind of like when my mother used to call me by my full name whenever I was in trouble." And the lady next to her laughed. So which one's yours now? The Schnauzer. His name's Otto. My dog, Otto. And the lady said, it seems strange to call him my dog. I've only had him a few days. And they got him at the pound. They said his name was Otto, so I guess that's what it is. I don't want to change it, I guess. I don't want to make him uncomfortable. I want to make sure he knows he's mine. I guess I'm going to keep him. And Gloria said, why wouldn't you keep him? Well, he doesn't mind me, the lady said. He misbehaves a lot. I never owned a dog before. I didn't know it would be like this. Gloria said, since you're new at owning a dog, could I give you a little advice? Sure. Now listen, dogs live in packs. They are pack animals, and somebody's got to be the leader of the pack. It needs to be you. If you let the dog be the leader of the pack, the dog is always going to be misbehaving. So you need to behave so that the dog knows that you're the leader of the pack and he isn't. And the lady next to her said, well, it makes sense when you say it that way. I think I probably have been a little too hesitant. And then they sat there for a little minute talking about dog groomers. And Gloria looked at her watch and thought that it was time to get back home. She said, I have dinner in the oven, so we gotta go. She snapped the leash back on Mac and they headed down back to her home. Dinner was ready, and Gloria took it to eat in front of the TV set. She was gonna binge watch some more of Game of Thrones. Nobody'd even been killed yet when the phone rang. It was her dear friend, but Gloria had never heard Pam so upset before. Pam said, it's my daughter. She's fallen in lust. She spends every waking minute with a guy who's 5 or 6 years older than she is. He dropped out of high school, and now my daughter's ditching classes to spend more time with him. I think the guy does drugs. And every time I try to talk to my daughter about it, she just blows up in my face. Gloria settled in to listen because she realized all her friend really needed to do was vent. She forgot about the Game of Thrones and just listened to her friend pour her heart out. After about an hour and a half, her friend said, it always makes me feel better whenever I talk to you. And Gloria laughed to herself, since she'd had so little opportunity to get a word in edgewise. Put on her pajamas, looked at herself in the mirror, she brushed her teeth and said, an ordinary day. I wish I was the kind of person who made some sort of impact on other people's lives.
Chilichonse ungapangingati palibechikondi I did a story at a festival some years ago, and after the set was over, storyteller Masanko Banda from Malawi came up to me and said, my grandmother always said, Chili chonse ungopange ngate, palibe chikondi, palibe wachita. Whatever you do, if you have not done it with love, you have done nothing. It was the mid-1980s, and there was some increasing tension across the country between the African American and Jewish communities. We were seeing some of that in Philadelphia, and two gentlemen, George Ross, who was chairman of the American Jewish Committee at that time, William H. Gray, who was a congressman from Philadelphia, also from a family of ministers, came together and said, what can we do to address this in our city? So they came up with an idea for a program they thought they might institute for a year or two. The program went on for over 25 years to identify students from both communities who had demonstrated some leadership capacity or ability in their schools, their churches, their communities, their synagogues, their mosques, and bring them together after an interview process and send them on a journey that would be an immersion of culture. We traveled to Senegal, to Gambia in West Africa, to Israel, to New York, where they learned about American immigration, and then to the South, where they would meet with people who were actively involved in the civil rights struggle here in America. It was a non-traditional itinerary, a true immersion in culture, but one year, the woman who put together our itinerary thought it might be a good experience for our students to go into a refugee camp. Without going into lots of detail, you can Google it and look it up yourself, but during that time, Senegal's neighbor, their northern neighbor, Mauritania, actually had a system of slavery in place. And when that system, there was an attempt to abolish it, there was violent backlash, and people fled across the border or were forced out of the country across the border into Senegal. Many of them were being housed in structures that were normally used to house grain. They hadn't even been given official refugee status from the country of Senegal. The woman who put our trip together also had her own organization, took some money from her organization to buy some basic things for the people, and thought that perhaps we could go in because there were hundreds of children there. So we went to a store, we bought wiffle balls and bats, Nerf frisbees and footballs and soccer balls and air pumps and bags of candy. The van took us as far as it could, and we got out, grabbed our things, and began to walk. I just looked at the ground. I thought this was going to be a really low point on our journey, one that had been truly rich in our experiences. Just watched the dust billowing up from our feet as we walked. But as we walked, we noticed a dust cloud ahead of us moving toward us. As it got closer, the dust cleared a little bit, and there were children in the dust cloud, clapping, singing. They came into our midst and took our hands and continued singing and led us behind one of those structures that was where people were housed. And when we looked, there were hundreds of other children sitting on the ground. So there were some adults opposite us who said something in their own language which sounded like a welcome, and I motioned for my students to sit. Some women came over and motioned for us to stand up, and we weren't quite sure what was going on until our guide and our translator came over and said, "Oh, the children have a gift for you. They want to present you with a gift because you are their guests." The women who had left came back with fabric and spread it on the ground. "They didn't want you to sit on the dirt," he said. So these teenagers from America, from homes of plenty, sat down on the fabric, and we received our gift. We didn't understand the language, but it was a skit that the children presented. It was a young man who had gone to the French school to learn how to rule his people, and he came back to the village with piles and piles of books, and people would come to him with problems, and he would flip through the pages of the book to find out where that problem was in that category, and he would give them the directions that were in the book, and a series of silly mishaps would occur until a marabout, a spiritual man, reconnected him with the ancestral ways of doing things, and all was well. We, in our Western way of thinking, believe these children had nothing, less than nothing. We went to give them something: candy, toys. what they gave to us was the greatest gift of all. They gave us themselves with no status, no money, many separated from parents, and did it with a seemingly innate fundamental understanding that underneath all the man-made barriers, we are all fundamentally human. Well, we didn't drop our supplies and leave. We felt we owed them much more than that. I stood in the midst of children, and with the help of my translator, I taught them, and we sang together an Ella Jenkins call and response song. Did you feed my cow? Yes, ma'am. Can you tell me how? We stayed, our kids showed them how to hit the wiffle ball and run the bases and blew up the soccer ball, pumped it up, and they played soccer. Our girls taught their little girls hand clapping games. We helped them prepare food, listened to their stories. All the while, children kept coming up to me going, "Yes, ma'am." The song was as treasured a gift as the candy, which was by then all gone. Chiliton se unga pangingati, palibe chikondi, palibe wachita. Palibe wachita, palibe wachita.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? Are you okay? Yes? Are you not storied out yet? You still have time for energy for stories? Yes? Do you fancy a riddle? Do you want to hear my most beloved riddle? Okay, this was told to me by a year 5 pupil when I was in a school once, so about 9 years old. And it's my favorite riddle. Once there was a bridge that could only carry 3 people. So one night a butcher, a baker, and a candlestick maker were crossing this bridge. And as they were walking halfway across, the bridge broke and they fell into the water with a splash. Why? So once there was a bridge that could only carry 3 people. One night a butcher, a baker, and a candlestick maker were crossing that bridge, and halfway across the bridge broke and they fell into the water with a splash. Any ideas why? It's gone very quiet. Say again? That's exactly what I said when I was asked this riddle by a year 5 pupil. I said maybe the butcher was taking a joint of meat or something, you know? Sometimes you say, people will say, maybe the baker was carrying a sack of flour. One of my favorite responses was in a school in Liverpool. If you know England, Liverpool people are known for their quick-wittedness and their sort of intelligence and sharpness and love of trains. And there was a little lad and he put his hand up and he said, maybe the butcher was taking his pig for a walk. Maybe the butcher was taking his pig for a walk. That's why the bridge broke. Isn't that a beautiful image? And even driving back, I can imagine a pig on a leash, you know, with a butcher. So these are all good answers, but do you want to hear the answer? Okay. And this is why this is my favorite riddle, because not only did I not get the answer, but it's a perfect storytelling riddle because it's all about intonation. So once there was a bridge that could only carry 3 people. So one night, I'll wait. One night, with shining armor, maybe a lance, a butcher, a baker, and a candlestick maker makes 4, and that's why the bridge broke. Isn't that a beautiful spoken riddle? And also, as well, it really makes me happy because I've got a little red book of riddles that I've collected, mainly in schools when I've told a riddle and the riddles come back. And it really makes me happy to know that whether they're getting them off the internet or whatever, it doesn't matter. But the fact that the spoken riddles are still being shared gives me hope that these stories are still being shared and trying to sort of figure out the mystery and the enigma. So my final story of the official story of the festival now is a small one from the north of India. Is that okay, guys? Yeah? Okay, so imagine an old man in the northern part of India. Imagine an old man with a blanket over his shoulders, a little staff, and he's walking through a forest. It's a beautiful, dense forest. I mean, just so dense, you know? And a little while later, he comes across Bandar. You know Bandar? Monkey. And Monkey is so happy, and he goes, Maharaji, 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 Maharaji. It's such an honor. We never get any guests here in the forest. Is there anything I can do to make your journey easier? And the old man says, well, yeah, I've been walking for such a long time, and I'm a bit parched, I'm a bit thirsty. Is there any chance you could get me a drink? The words hadn't left his drink, hadn't left his, he was gone. And this monkey is zigzagging through the branches of the tree, and he goes to a mango tree, and he plucks the juiciest, the fattest mango that you can imagine. And he comes back and he presents it with a great reverence to the old man. He says, Maharaji, he says, you know how this works. The bit where the stalk is, you pull that off. And then you squeeze it, because that little bit can be bitter. And then you get the fruit while it's still in the pulp, and you crush it. The fruit while it's still in the skin, and you crush it into a pulp. And then where you made that hole, then you start... And then you take the skin and go, and then the best bit, the stone. And you suck all the flesh off the stone. And when the stone is dry, only then have you finished, because everybody knows in India we chupan mangoes. We suck mangoes. We don't eat mangoes. Enjoy. I hope that will quench your thirst. And the old man said, thank you, that's very kind of you. Would you like to walk with me? And he said, I don't mind if I do. So there was the old man, and there was Monkey. They're there toodling through that forest on a beautiful afternoon like today. And a little while later, who do they come across but Fox? And Fox sees him and he says, Maharaji, Maharaji, Maharaji. It's so exciting. We never get any visitors here. It's so good. It's such an honor. It's great. Can we do anything? Can I help you in any way to make your journey easier? And the old man says, yeah. He says, your friend Monkey here has been really kind. He's got me a mango and even told me how to suck it, give me explicit instructions, he says, to quench my thirst. I'm a bit peckish. Is there any chance you could give me a snack? Well, the words hadn't left his lips when off Fox went. Because he remembered 5 minutes earlier, he'd seen a fresh fish on the riverbank. So he comes back with that fish and he says, I hope this is a nice little snack to just take the edge off your hunger. He says, you top and tail it, clean it. He says, I would probably use ginger, garlic, coriander, and maybe fresh onions. A bit of masala, a bit of butter on there. 10 minutes, that's all you need. It'll be beautiful. Thank you, said the old man. Would you like to walk with me? I don't mind if I do, he said. So there was the old man, there was Monkey, and there was Fox. So 3 of them are toodling through the forest on a beautiful afternoon. And who do they come across next? But Rabbit. And Rabbit's there, Maharaji, 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 Maharaji. He said, it's such an honor to have a visitor here. We never get any guests. Is there anything I can do to make your journey easier? And the old man said, yes. He says, well, your 2 friends have been kind. Bandar, Monkey here, he got me a mango to quench my thirst. Your friend Fox has got me a fish and a really good recipe as well to take the edge off my hunger. He says, but in a while I'll need something a little bit more substantial. And the rabbit's scratching his head and he's thinking, but I only eat grass. What can I give the old man? So he thinks for a while and he thinks a little bit more. And then he calls his friend, the Monkey and the Fox, and he says, can you go and get some wood, please? And they said, yeah. And so they got some wood and he says, can you put it in a pile? And they says, yeah. And they put it in a pile and he says, can you light it? And they got the fire going and soon it was roaring. And he looked at his 2 friends and he said, when the old man eats me, can you make sure that he gets good nourishment for my body? And a second later, he's about to leap into the flames when the old man says, no! And those animals quiver in fear, and in a gentle voice, he says, no. And he drops his cloak and his staff, and he says, I'm the Buddha. He says, and I've been traveling this world, he says, trying to find the true nature of humans and the true nature of animals. And I can tell you what, he says, amongst humans I found the whole spectrum of good, bad, ugly, and everything in between, every shade that you can imagine. But in this forest today, he says, all I've found is kindness and compassion. You, Monkey, he says, you got a drink to quench a thirsty man. For that, I'm grateful. He said, you, Fox, you got food to take away the hunger of a stranger. For that, I'm grateful. But you, Rabbit, You were willing to sacrifice yourself for somebody so it would take away their hunger. He says you should learn to take more care of yourself. You're a special animal. And a special animal like you needs a special place in this world. And he picked up that beautiful, soft creature. And with gentle hands, he lifted him past the flames of that fire, past those treetops, past the clouds. And there, up on the full fat moon, he placed him, where he remains to this very day. And that's why in India we don't say there's a man in the moon, we say there's a rabbit in the moon. And even to this day, he's smiling benignly, illuminating the world, reminding us not just to be kind to others, but to be kinder to ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This weekend has been filled with so many memories of all these years that we've been together. I want to just share a closing memory with you, really. The first year I came here was 42 years ago. I had never been to a storytelling festival. I didn't know what a storytelling festival was. I'd never stood up on a stage in front of people and been called a storyteller. Somehow my name had ended up over here and I'd been invited. Had no idea what I was coming to do. But the great good fortune was, in those days we were housed in residence homes, and I was housed up at Dr. Bill and Miss Virginia Kennedy's house with Catherine Wyndham. And that was the beginning, that weekend, of a more than 30-year intimate relationship with a person I came to call my best friend. That very weekend, we discovered that Catherine was born the same year my mother was born. Catherine's birthday was the day after my birthday. I was born the same year Catherine's son was born. We were put in the world, to be related to each other. Pretty soon, we were showing up at different places. The second festival I ever went to, Catherine was also there too. It was the Northern Appalachian Festival in Wellsboro, Pennsylvania. And Catherine and I were there, and they were keeping us in the visiting team quarters under the gymnasium. And one afternoon, just before dinner time, Catherine and I left that gymnasium and we started walking over to where we were going to have dinner and then perform later at Strawn Auditorium. And we were crossing that campus and we didn't know that up in a dormitory with windows open, there were some kids up there throwing water balloons. Until all of a sudden, a big fat water balloon hit Catherine right between her shoulders, and it burst, and the water went all over us everywhere. And without a half-second pause, she turned, looked up at them, and said, "You haven't even heard us yet." Yeah. She was so quick and so brilliant and so on top of everything. Always, always, always. And we had such great, wonderful adventures together. Catherine and I would call each other on the phone about once a week. I would often call her on Sunday afternoon, and she would say, "Is that you, Donald Davis? Are you still telling stories?" I said, "I'm getting ready to." I said, "Catherine, did you go to church today?" And she'd say, "I did." I'd say, "Did it do you any good whatsoever?" And she'd usually say, "No. But I went and got credit for it with the Lord." I would ask her about some of her preachers, and I will not tell you about some of the comments she had to make. That can just stay silent. It was Catherine who began to encourage me to retire after 25 years in the local church and tell stories full time. She brought it up, I did not. She said, "You know, Donald Davis, there are other people who can preach besides you. I don't even know if you can or not because I've never heard you. But I know you can tell stories. And you need to tell more stories than you can tell part-time." And she was the encourager who led me into deciding to do this, to make this the course of my whole life journey. But what I really want to tell you is about one little moment when I learned from Catherine the lesson which was worth the entire 30-plus years of friendship. She and I were at a festival in Huntsville, Alabama. It was one of those one-stage festivals where all the tellers, are working together. Everybody's together. The audience is together. You're together all day long, all day long, all day long. And so when there was a lunch break, they had marked off a little room as sort of a retreat room there were 4 of us who were tellers, for the tellers to be able to go have lunch and just have a little break and rest for a few minutes. There was a sign on the door that said, "Tellers retreat, tellers only, please." And Catherine and I were in there eating our lunch. They brought us barbecue from a local restaurant there in town. When all of a sudden, the door just kind of flew open and a woman just marched into the room. And she came right up to Catherine and she said, "That most horrible thing you can say to somebody, you remember me, don't you?" And Catherine just looked at her like, "Who are you?" And then the woman said, "You haven't seen me since I was a little child. I guess I look different now." And Catherine's still looking at her, trying to get a clue. And the woman said, "They say I look a lot like my mama." And you can hear Catherine's brain saying, "Well, who's your mama?" And then the woman said, "And I lost my husband in October." And Catherine looked at her and said, "Well, how careless of you." And the woman turned on her heel and left. And then dear Catherine looked at me, and in all seriousness, she said, "Why would we ever say we lost someone we love? Don't we know what the word lost means? Lost means they don't know where they are. Lost means we don't know where they are. Lost means they're not home and they don't know how to get home. Why would you ever say you lost someone you love? Can't we just say they died? That never hurt anybody. And I remember that every time I hear someone use that little, epithetical phrase referring to death, we lost someone, and I say to myself, think about what we're saying. Think about what we're thinking at that moment. And I want to bring that to us so that we remember that as we leave, even with all our plans to come back, if some of us don't make it next year, we haven't lost each other. We know who we are because we know our stories. We know where we are because we know our stories. We know the way home because we know our stories. And I know that thanks to Miss Catherine Wyndham, who made me a storyteller. So long.